Hello, I'm Richard Winfield. I'm the founder of Brevi Group and I'm the creator of the Directors Academy. This webinar applies to anybody who is or aspires to be a company director or advises company directors, such as a corporate secretary. The duties of directors were formalized in the Companies Act in 2006, which is obviously more than 10 years ago now. And although the duties are still defined in exactly the same way, the world has moved on and the interpretation of them has changed. I'm going to take you through an interpretation of Section 172 of the Companies Act 2006, where this all started, but I'm going to refer specifically to this report, which came out in October 2018. It's Guidance on Directors' Duties, and it was written by GC 100, and I'll tell you a little bit about who they are at the end. But basically, they are the corporate secretary type people in the FTSE 100 companies, and they've produced this guidance specifically because the interpretation really is different from what it was in 2006. The presentation I'm about to give you, I have recorded, and that has been uploaded into the Essential Directorship Masterclass under Directors' Behaviours. So you will be able to get access to it in the future. So let me just go ahead now and take you through the slide presentation. And then if there are any questions at the end, we'll discuss them at that stage. So, Section 172 of the Companies Act 2006, say more than 10 years ago, and I'm referring to Guidance on Directors' Duties, Sections 172 and the Stakeholder Considerations published by GC 100 in October 2018. It was produced to coincide with the publication of a new corporate governance code by the Finance Reporting Council in September 2018. GC 100, as I've explained, produced a guidance note, Section 172 and Stakeholder Considerations, to provide practical help to directors on their performance of the Section 172 duty. So just to be clear, this is technically nothing to do with corporate governance, insofar as corporate governance only applies through corporate governance codes to certain sorts of companies. I believe corporate governance practices and principles should apply to everybody. But the Corporate Governance Code came out and applied newly in January 2019, and it was extended also to AIM companies in September 2018. So it's a very good time to review these things. But basically, this applies to all directors, regardless of whether you come under any corporate governance regimes. Though GC 100 is the voice of general counsel and company secretaries working in FTSE 100 companies. It was established to engage with government, regulators and policymakers to provide practical and business-focused input on law and regulation, which affects the largest UK companies. But the rules, the section in the 2006 Act applies to all company directors, and we can take guidance from this proposal. Unlike the Corporate Governance Code, the Companies Act applies to all limited companies, and therefore these sections to all registered directors. Section 172 imposes a general duty on every company director to act in a way they consider in good faith would be likely to promote the success of the company for the benefit of its shareholders as a whole. So at this stage, very specifically, shareholders. The duty is owed to the company. Section 172 also requires directors, in making their decisions and choices and in setting policies and strategy, to have regard to a non-exhaustive list of factors, including the interests of employees and how the actions of the company affect customers, suppliers, the community and the environment, as well as the company's reputation. So in other words, it does actually cover other organizations and interests, not just shareholders. The factors are designed to ensure that in promoting the success of the company, broader implications of decisions are considered by the directors. Section 172 applies across a director's role, ranging from their company's strategy and defining its culture to agreeing governance structure, setting business plans and budgets, setting policies and procedures, and making business decisions. The director's job is not to balance the interests of the company and those of other stakeholders. Instead, after weighing up all relevant factors, it is to choose the action that best leads to the success of the company, having regard to the long term. This can sometimes mean that certain stakeholders are adversely affected, but this does not call into question decisions made. So it's an interesting concept, isn't it, that although you are to consider lots of different interests, it's the long-term interest of the company that really matters. So here's the details of section 172, the duty to promote the company. Subsection 1, a director of a company must act in the way he or she considers in good faith would be most likely to promote the success of the company for the benefit of its members as a whole, members being shareholders, and in doing so to have regard, amongst other matters, to the likely consequences of any decision in the long term, the interests of the company's employees, the need to foster the company's business relationships with suppliers, customers, and others, the impact of the company's operations on the community and the environment, the desirability of the company maintaining a reputation for high standards of business conduct, and the need to act fairly as members of the community. So now it clearly defines a much broader basis. So practical steps to help you discharge your section 172 duty. So these are coming from the GC 100 report. Look at strategy. In setting strategy and considering risk issues, think about your overall duties and the stakeholder and other factors which will contribute to the company's success or will be affected by its activities. Consider how you assess which third parties with whom the company deals are stakeholders and the appropriate engagement with them. Consider the relationship between corporate vision and goals, or the strategy to achieve the vision and goals, and stakeholder interests. For example, most businesses depend on their customers, their own people, and their suppliers. Consider the relationship between corporate vision and goals, or your strategy to achieve the vision and goals, and stakeholder interests. For example, most businesses depend on their customers, their own people, and their suppliers. Should you explicitly recognize your company's dependencies? Where your corporate vision, goals, or strategy reflect stakeholder interests or goals, are you appropriately and proportionately monitoring and reinforcing those elements of the company's activities? It's easy to find yourself drawn into prioritizing immediate and urgent issues at the expense of the longer term and important issues. Consider the extent to which the ongoing and sustained success of your company's business, its long-term vision and goals and impact, including its impact on the communities and environment in which it operates, as well as its reputation. These are all important for its success. If these are important, do you think that they are given sufficient time and focus by the board and management? Training. Provide suitable induction training to all new directors, which should include training on their duties, including those under section 172, and also provide refresher courses from time to time. Consider what training on duties is appropriate for subsidiary directors and management. Consider what other training or career development is appropriate to extend the skills of the company's managers and others generally, and which may enhance their effectiveness in achieving the company's goals in line with the board's stakeholder and other duties, and the requirement to have regard to stakeholders' interests. Provide guidance for directors, including explanations of directors' roles, duties, and responsibilities, including section 172. Information. Boards need appropriate and relevant information to make informed judgments, including when deciding which judgments to leave to others in the business who may be better placed to make them. Therefore, you should think about information flows to the board, both those that support achieving success for the benefit of shareholders as a whole, and those that support your consideration of stakeholder factors. To assess what information is required, ask yourself whether you know enough about the stakeholder interests and factors, relevant to your company. You cannot know everything and will have to rely on others for many things, but is the understanding of the board sufficient to discharge your Section 172 duty? Where you do not know all the relevant facts or have the expertise to make judgments with confidence, are you receiving the right inputs from others? Ask yourself whether the metrics and reports you receive are broad enough to address the Section 172 duty, or whether they're too focused on, for example, financial reports, current operational issues, and market data. Existing information flows may support the right focuses, but you may want to consider whether or not that is the case and not just assume it. Consider whether you're receiving too much information, which is obscuring the things that really matter for the success of the company, and whether from time to time the information you need to understand as a priority should be adapted, changed, or simplified. Ask yourself whether you need to consider what information is available to others in the company, irrespective of whether it comes to the board, and whether it appears to be supporting the achievement of the company's goals and the board's responsibilities under Section 172 in relation to shareholders and stakeholder factors. Certain judgments are likely to rest with management below the board, but you may want to understand aspects of the approach of management to some of these judgments, including whether people are working from consistent or different information to that seen by the board. Policies and processes. At board level, consider whether and how you may want to seek to ensure relevant stakeholder factors, whether specified in Section 172 or not, are considered in setting policies at board level. Consider the balance of focus and responsibility for the duties as between each director, including the chair, non-executive directors, and executive directors. As a director, you remain personally responsible for the discharge of your own responsibilities. But each director will often rely, to one extent or another, on other directors, in particular on executive directors with allocated responsibilities, as well as on the wider management and team. The chair will often have a key role in guiding board focus appropriately. Refer to directors' duties in their terms of appointment and the description of the role of each director. Recognize Section 172 duty in the terms of reference of the board and, if appropriate, of each committee. Ensure the company secretary attends all board meetings and is generally available to advise directors as necessary on matters relating to their duties and responsibilities under Section 172. So you can see that Section 172 is a consistent theme. Obviously, this is about Section 172, but the repetition of it makes the point that in all your discussions and deliberations, you do need to refer to the specific responsibilities of directors and boards. Ensure that remuneration policies and incentives reflect Section 172 factors where relevant, for example, by including metrics and performance metrics. In determining the process for board papers, ask that stakeholder factors are addressed where judged relevant, with appropriate inputs to assess them. Have a consistent approach to minute taking, whether brief or detailed, and as to when Section 172 factors are minuted. Now, at management level, provide training and guidance to managers on writing effective board papers to ensure that the impact of a proposed decision is proportionately, clearly, and appropriately explained to directors. Consider consistency of approach of policies. Consider a consistency of approach of policies, their accessibility to those they apply to, and the extent to which they are easy to understand. Consider how your policies have been rolled out and then applied in practice to achieve planned outcomes. Question the balance of prescription and flexibility for your business in your policies. Some issues may need strict rules, others may need to allow judgment. Now, this applies to directors of UK subsidiary companies. Ensure directors of subsidiary group companies know that they owe their duty under Section 172 to the subsidiary company, not to the group parent company. In most cases, the interests of the subsidiary and parent companies will be closely aligned. That means subsidiary directors may weigh Section 172 considerations in a similar way to parent company directors, but it does depend on the facts, and it is very important that directors know who and what they are in each particular case. Subsidiary directors, when acting in that role, should focus on the interests of the specific subsidiary and its success. But the views of parent companies as the owners are usually important and are probably proper factors that should be taken into account. Directors of UK joint venture companies. Ensure directors of joint venture companies understand that their Section 172 duty is owed in their capacities as directors of a joint venture company to that company. So the same rules apply. Wherever you are, when you are acting as the director of a company, your responsibility is towards that company. Encourage directors of joint venture companies appointed by one participant in the joint venture to be clear when they are acting as a representative of the shareholder and when they are acting as directors of the joint venture company. In other words, make sure they understand which hat they're wearing at a particular moment. For joint venture directors, assessing the joint venture company's interests, it will normally be a relevant factor that the shareholders have agreed certain processes or goals for the joint venture company. Where a joint venture has been established, for example, between two shareholders, and it's envisaged that each shareholder's appointed directors will bring particular attributes or perspectives to the board, encourage the directors to have regard to those expectations. Engaging with stakeholders. It is self-evident that for most companies, consideration of stakeholder interests will be less effective, or at least perceived as less effective, unless combined with appropriate engagement tailored to the circumstances of each company and its business. Engagement is rarely a matter solely for the board of a company. Engagement is rarely a matter solely for the board of a company because it involves judgment and actions on the part of managers and employees, as companies are almost always judged by stakeholders on their direct business interactions with those they deal with in the company. So in other words, you're experienced by the people who are doing things. Accordingly, as you consider stakeholder engagement, you may wish to consider how stakeholder groups experience the company, its board and management, through those day-to-day business interactions, as well as through any specific processes, structures, or channels established for engagement. You may wish to consider the extent to which engagement feedback, both from stakeholders to the company and vice versa, is or needs to be fed back to the management, to the board, or into the wider business. Consider the balance between data collation, such as employee or customer survey responses, and complaints or other feedback on the one hand, and specific board or senior management interactions with smaller groups of stakeholders on the other hand. Consider asking yourself and management whether your company does what it says it does to and for stakeholders, or whether it is perceived as doing so. So, culture. The processes, rules, and decisions your company makes will create a culture or cultures within the company or within its different business segments. A clear tone from the top will support developing the culture you wish to have throughout the organization and inform business decisions at all levels. It's good practice for directors, management, and employees to think about how customer service, staff experience, and the other elements of stakeholder factors support the success of the business in focusing on managing what are indirectly shareholders' assets for the benefit of those shareholders. Your company's culture can develop so it is automatic that relevant stakeholder factors are built into the conduct of the company's business. Section 172 does not require balancing of the varied interests, but having regard to them in pursuing the success of the company for shareholders as a whole. In most organizations, culture is set not only by what the board and senior management do and say, but also what is said and done by managers or role models, good or bad, at every level of the organization. New employees will often worry most about what their direct manager or supervisor does or says they should do, rather than the provisions of a remote policy. You should consider what culture or cultures are right for different parts of your company's activities. Many of the most admired companies also have a strong sense of social purpose and or a stewardship approach to their business, their stakeholders, and the environment. And it's quite interesting, my reading recently is that corporate social responsibility, in a way, is becoming out of date, and corporate social purpose is becoming more relevant. Duty of care. The Section 172 duty must be fulfilled by a director in accordance with the duty of care, skill, and diligence imposed by Section 174 of the Act. Section 174 of the Act imposes these two standards. An objective standard of the care, skill, and diligence that would be exercised by a reasonably diligent person with the general knowledge, skill, and experience that may reasonably be expected of a person carrying out the functions carried out by the director in relation to the company. In other words, you are who you are, and you're judged against the standards that you ought to be able to apply. And there's a subjective standard based on the director's own abilities of the care, skill, and diligence that would be exercised by a reasonably diligent person with the general knowledge, skill, and experience of that director. So specifically, if you have a legal background, a financial background, a marketing background, then you will be expected to be judged against a higher standard than somebody who is just a general purpose director. And that brings us to the end of the presentation. So this report, like so many reports, is available online at no cost. I do recommend that you bring it down. So it's Guidance on Directors' Duties, Section 172 and Stakeholder Considerations is the title. And the Association of General Counsel and Company Secretaries working in the FTSE 100 companies is the name of the organization. So thank you for participating. Let's see if we have any comments. Otherwise, I'll sign off. But I would like to just remind you that this a recording of this presentation has been uploaded to the Essential Directorship Masterclass for those of you who are participating in that. So I think we shall settings chat. Thank you very much, and goodbye.